All right, overall plan for today. So we're going to be talking about discussion and intro sections, and then doing a lab meeting where people, I think there's 4 groups who have results already that will share them, talk about what they did, what they found, and what they're doing next, just to get some input from the rest of our research lab here. Before we get into any of that though, I want to talk a little bit about your self-assessments. As I said, it is taking quite a while. I've shortened a bit, now it takes me just under an hour to review one of them, right? But that still adds up to a lot of time that's going to take for me to get through all of them. So I've gone through enough. Like Elizabeth somehow powered through it and covered her 4 skills, all of them already for everyone. But I still have a lot more to go. But I think I've gone through enough to know what advice to give to all of you as a class in terms of guidance for what you should be doing differently in general, both for your final self-assessment in terms of how you approach the justifications, as well as what you can be doing week to week to try to reach your goals. Right? So in terms of the advice I was going to give you all in one-on-one meetings, I can give it to you all right now. And then as far as self-assessment, I'll continue to power through as much as I can in the evenings, mornings, whatever else, in order to try to get through them and get them back to you as soon as I can. For the time being, I'm probably still going to try to finish them all before handing them all back to the whole class, just because I took a vote, as casual vote in the labs last week, and I think in one lab when I asked some people, they more preferred for it all to be returned at once, others the other way around. But I think it's probably still be more fair if I just give it back to everybody at the same time. But mainly I want to make sure I give you direction for what to do, aiming towards the rest of the semester. So in terms of how you approach the self-assessment, so I wrote my notes on my phone here. So for the justifications for your current skill level, for any particular major skill and all those little sub-skills that are listed under each major skill, there are a couple of main approaches that I've seen a lot of students do. One being to base it off the rubric and say, okay, the rubric says that I should be able to do everything by myself for a B, and I think that I can do that, therefore I think I deserve a B, that kind of approach. Another approach is that students talk about how they started off being kind of unsure about this, or haven't done this before, but because they've got through these experiences and worked hard at these things, they feel like they're now good at these things. Right? Both of which I found really enjoyable to read, right? And I think they're logical, and I can see that can be a good basis for your argument for your final assessments. But the downside, though, is that you notice the way that I just described it was you're just kind of telling me stuff. You're telling me that, I was bad at this, I did some work, therefore I'm good at it now, but no examples were shown for how good are you at it right now, right? So I think that's what's missing from a lot of people's justification. So something to keep in mind and to build towards for your final self-assessments is to gather evidence, right? If you felt like for real world problem 3, you had brainstormed a really good list of in your self-reflection, you brainstormed a really good list of research questions, then make sure you kind of put that into a file, right, for major skill 1, so that when you get to the final assessment, you're like, oh yeah, I remember, I had that good list, I'm going to post there. Because there's a difference between saying, my lists of research questions got better and better with each real world problem, right? I don't necessarily take your word for it, but if you showed me the lists that you actually made, right? Because for every real world problem in your self-assessment, in your self-reflections, in the weekly self-reflections, I ask you a question of brainstorm a bunch of questions that you might try to answer in your research project. So show me those. Just cut and paste those into your justification so I can look at it and see, oh yeah, those research questions are very diverse and appropriate and creative. Then I'll be able to say, yeah, I totally agree that you deserve an A for that particular skill. Does that kind of make sense? Right? So I think the general framework of saying, okay, compared to that rubric, I feel like I'm at a B plus or an A, whatever, that works. But then justify that, right? So for each sub-skill, so within each major skill, there might be a list of anywhere from like 4 to 6 or whatever, 8 kind of mini skills that are part of that. For each one, start to keep track of evidence of each of those, right? Whether it's a photograph of something some idea you listed out, or a picture you drew in your lab notebook. It could be some email exchanges, as long as you got permission from the others in the email exchange to share it with me. Feel free to put those in, even if it's just a mess of cut and paste and pictures and screenshots that come after your justification, that you wrote a couple sentences just to explain, oh yeah, I posted this to let you see how I was able to outline every step of my experiment very clearly. Right? That would be good evidence of, oh, you can outline the steps really clearly. Do you see what I mean? So make sure you're showing evidence. Yeah, right? So I think also it's a good idea to kind of take each sub-skill at a time, right? So there's certain sub-skills that we haven't done yet, like review other people's work, which you will do if you want later on in this semester. Also just taking part in these lab meetings, being here during lecture time to listen to people's ideas and to write down a couple ideas in your input sheets, right? You can refer to that. You can take a picture of that from CrowdMark and insert that and say, look, I came up with these interesting ideas to get these people to think about it. So even if you don't do the optional review of the writing of other groups, you're reviewing people's work during the lab meetings as well. Okay? So make sure you're keeping track of keeping these things. Right? So as far as a good, efficient approach to kind of gathering what you need for your final self-assessments, that's what your weekly reflections are for. That's what they've been for all along, but you might not have realized how useful the weekly reflections are until now when you realize, okay, if I really do, like, so you notice the self-reflections from this past week are more open. It says research skills, write whatever you want. The idea being that you will go through every sub-skill and say, okay, this week, of that list of tasks I did this week, where does that fit into my different sub-skills and skills? Right? And just list them all and say, oh yeah, I did some brainstorming, I did some research, I did some correcting of the protocols as I was doing them in lab, right? And just write that all down. Get all the screenshots and photos into your self-reflections every week, so that when it comes time to your self-reflections at the very end of the semester, you have weeks worth of stuff saved up already. Does that kind of make sense? Okay, so make good use of your self-reflections just as a weekly reminder of, okay, by Monday every week, I'm going to note down everything that might be useful at the end. Okay. The other way that it's useful is if you're, again, going through, so I've kept your self-assessments open, right? I'm not going to mark it directly on Canvas. We have a huge spreadsheet that we've been passing back and forth in order to keep track of our things offline, right? So that you can log on whenever you like to revisit your self-reflections or your self-assessment, so that you can look at it again and say, okay, well, of all those sub-skills, which ones did I not address at all? Which ones have I not tried yet, such as writing an introduction or discussion? Or which ones do I feel like I haven't really had a chance to try out for myself? Maybe you haven't done the stats stuff yourself yet. Maybe you haven't tried listing out every step of an experiment to see if you can do it, right? So maybe you make a point of it that, okay, for next week's thing, I'm gonna volunteer to be the one that lists every step and to try to kind of outline the equipment list for next week, right? Just so you have a chance to do that, and then you'll record that and have both the experience and the recorded evidence that you can show me later on. Okay, so some of the strongest self-assessments I've seen so far, those might have started with talking about the rubrics type stuff, but then listed for each sub-skill examples and also pasted pictures of those the results of that sub-skill. So if you say you're good at coming up with research questions, just show me the lists. It's okay if it's just a bunch of ugly screenshots, but at least I can skim through and see, oh yeah, those are pretty darn good. Does that kind of make sense? Okay, so I think if you do that week to week and just fill in all the sub-skills you haven't done yet, right, and gather all the photos you can week to week to week, right, your final self-assessment should be much easier to assemble and it'll be much stronger. It'll have the evidence to back up each of your statements, kind of like you're doing in your posters. Okay? Any questions about that first before I give Elizabeth a chance to talk about what she's noticed? Yeah, Cara?
Would you say that the final assessment of this course could take as long as the one that you previously done, or?
Yeah, good question. So the final the reason why I included things like intro, discussion, title, abstract, all this stuff in this self-assessment is so that you've seen it and you kind of know what to aim for. You know what the skills and sub-skills are. I think it should take less time, right? Because you're not reading through everything anymore. It'll almost be a copy and paste of this self-assessment. So you've seen it, it's just a matter of now showing me how far you've come since. Not so much the whole path of how you improve, but just show me evidence of, oh, now, it's the end of the semester, here's how good my method stuff is now. Here's how good my result stuff is now, right? So just show me evidence of that by cutting and pasting from your self-reflections. I'm hoping that if you've approached the weekly self-reflections in the right way, the final self-assessment will be easy because you're just taking pre-formed pieces and sticking in the right category. Yeah, question?
Would the number of questions be about the same?
Yeah, number of questions will be pretty much the same, right? The only difference being, like, say for your discussion section, I only asked for kind of where you want to go and where you started with, but now then I'll add where you are currently now that you had a chance to actually do it, right? And you'll have a chance to justify those. So same number of skills, same sub-skills listed underneath it, same idea of saying where you're at and telling me how. Okay? Or giving me the justification. Other questions? Yeah.
What about skills that you can't really have screenshots or proof of evidence for, such as like teamwork skills?
Yeah.
It's just something you kind of can only just be like, I did this, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. So there are some skills that you don't have screenshots of, such as like teamwork type skills. In that case, the more specific the examples you can give, the better, right? So I know, like, it does feel kind of weird and artificial to try to keep track of all this stuff, almost like trying to collect gold coins as a Mario character sort of thing. Of the ding, I got another point for helping a friend or saying a nice thing. Like, but at the same time, I mean, that's kind of the reality of a lot of jobs, right? Like, even for a job that's so much about just being a good teacher, like my job here, I do have salary reviews every 2 years where I have to say, okay, here are the things I did to enhance my teaching. Here are the things I did for professional development. Here are the things I did as service to the department, right? So when I happen to do something, whether it's attend a seminar to help learn some new skill, or volunteer for a particular project, or help someone with something, I'll just write it down. I just got used to having a document or writing down, on this date, I started attending this series of the seminar series. On this date, I took part in the survey. So that when it came time for me to do my salary review, I would just put each thing in the right category and then go for the salary review, right? And as much you get in that, if you get into that habit, as much as it feels kind of icky, right, to be collecting coins that way, it's just a way to make sure you don't forget things, right? I mean, kind of TMI to say so, but I think my salary reviews tend to go well, right? Just because I gather stuff on a continuous basis, such that when I collect it together, it's like, holy crap, there's like so many pages of it because I didn't forget any of it. I have a very bad memory, but I was organized enough that when I put it together, it looks good, right? So get in the habit for your own sake. As much as it's not, a lot of people are not comfortable with kind of marketing themselves in this way, but it's a part of getting jobs and getting good salary reviews and promotions, is to be able to clearly show people what you've done and show evidence of it, so you're not just saying I'm really great, but showing, look at all these projects I've been a part of, look at all these things that I do to make things better for the rest of the team. Look at all these things that show that I can be a good leader and manager and supervisor, right? And when people see the evidence of that, they'll say, okay, well, obviously we give it to the job for the person who's shown that they can do all these things, right? So this is a very, very useful skill I'm trying to teach you. Okay, other things. Elizabeth, you do want to share?
Yes, we're good. Okay, so I'm going to share my laptop because I wrote things down, and like Kevin, it needs to be written down. So most of my comments are probably going to be very similar to what Kevin just gave you guys, just because, especially the like overarching ones, such as try and be a little more specific with your comments. So, for example, like in major skill set 4, one of the sub skills that you guys were asked to talk about was about how you use different sets of equipment. And so instead of providing like a very general statement that's sort of like, I think I'm really good at using equipment, and then there's a period and that's the only sentence, instead you can just like provide a list of like all the new tools that you have been able to work with in this semester. So like you're like, I was able to use calipers to measure germination lengths. I was able to use a dissecting microscope for the first time. If you just give me like 2 or 3 examples for how you used it, like that's great in my book. Like you're already getting like really high like points at that point because you've shown to me that you've like thought about it a little more than just in these like general statements.
Yeah, and if I can add something, like, so if in your lab notebook also you noted down exactly how you decided to measure the radical length, right? That also shows that you were thinking about how to do it accurately and repeatedly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the same thing with observations. I think observations can sometimes be like the teamwork skills where it's like hard to be like, I took notes and you should believe that I did that. You can just take pictures of your lab notebooks and send those, and that way we can totally see like how much effort that you guys have put in and all that like extra hard work that you guys have been putting in labs to like record all those like little pieces of information. Yeah, so like Kevin said, there's obviously a lot of skills that appeared in the methods and results that you guys haven't quite had the chance to do yet, which is totally fine because you will have it be able to do them between now and the end of the semester. So skills tied to things like literature searches or the reviewing of your classmates. You guys will obviously be able to gain skills with that by writing your introductions and your discussions and then talking to each other about that later on. So be sure to like cite those specific moments where like, I knew that I had to find a paper to reference this one sentence, and so I put a search string in, this is my search string if you're feeling really extra, and then that shows me evidence that you were like really putting in the thought and energy into that one skill. The other one that I'm going to mention, like overall, I think a good thing, especially for your methods and results sections, because you guys have it and it's very easy, and again, like I don't want you guys spending hours on doing this, is if you are very proud about the change between like assignment 1 and assignment 2, for example, or assignment 2 and then this final one, if you just send me like the PDF links or put the PDFs of your different assignments in there, or you can like screenshot them and put them in as photos, like that's great, because Kevin and I don't have time, unfortunately, to go back, find your specific assignment that you're referring to and look at it on our own time. So you just putting in those like 2 PDF links that you already should have is like really good progress to show me the like difference that you have like improved upon from one step to the other, and it also requires less energy and time for you guys then that you don't have to waste on like writing up the full explanation when you can just show it to me.
Yeah, if I can insert a quick thing.
Yeah.
So I think some people have been using the image uploader to upload their PDFs. And what that does, if you have a 6-page PDF, is it makes a picture that shows in little pictures your 6 pages. So that doesn't work so well. So remember this, in my announcement I showed 2 different links. You can use the little picture icon to upload a picture. So if you have a single picture, a single graph, a single page of a document, that works. But if you have an actual PDF with multiple pages, use the little document, the little thing that looks like a piece of paper, to upload the actual document instead. Then I can actually open the document and flip through it. Okay, so documents for documents, pictures for pictures. Okay,
Yeah, that's it.
that's it? Yeah, thank you so much. Any other questions? Okay, so that's generally speaking what everyone can be doing, right? So keep track of things. So in terms of search strengthening, for example, let's say you're going to sit down and do some background research for the discussion section, because that's kind of a task that you decided to take on for this coming week. Just maybe take screenshots of each of your search strings, right? And just drag that into a document as you go, right? Just so we can see what are the different things you tried searching. We can kind of, I'd rather have too much than too little info, right? So if I skim through that and see how you're modifying your search string in order to narrow down to what you want, right? It kind of gets me a feel for the kind of the nuance and expertise you're using as you're searching for things. Are you just randomly searching words, or are you actually trying to increase or decrease the number of results you get based on your modifications? Right? So notice that little extra exercise of screenshot, drag into document, screenshot, drag into document, you now have a full documentation of how you search for things. Okay? So try to get into that habit. I think that's kind of a good thing to pretty much build a portfolio, to build a folder full of evidence to show that you're good at something. So if you're applying for a job later on where you have to do a literature search, you can say, here's some examples. Right? I wanted to answer this question, and here's how I searched for it. Here's the kind of papers I got. Here's the information I got from it that I put into my lab notebook. Right? So you're building a portfolio you can use for later job application, volunteer applications as well, scholarships as well. Right? Okay? I know this stuff takes time, and you really want to focus on getting your research done and your writing done, and that's important as well. But hopefully when you get used to because we're allowing this to be super rough, right? If you end up with a 15-page document of nothing but screenshotted searches, that's fine. Just throw it on there. I will skim through it, right? So you don't have to organize it, but get used to at least collecting it. Okay? Sound good? All right. Let's talk about discussion and intro now. The core instructions I want to give are here, but I kind of flip-flop between maybe just letting you read it on your own versus teach it, but I think I'll actually walk you through it. One, so I can kind of embellish and kind of give you examples to help you understand exactly what I mean, and also so that I can kind of judge from your faces and your questions what things need more clarifying. So do interrupt me if there's something that you think needs more clarifying. Out of curiosity, who's written a discussion section before? Okay, quite a few people. All right. So there's certain ways to do this well, right, that I'm going to explain. Because from what I've seen in this class, right, which usually has a similar mix of students as we have in the class right now, it's usually your first shot is not very good, right? So because we're not doing drafts of discussions and the real world problems anymore, we're doing just 2 drafts of your final one. I want to try to jump start you to the higher level right away, okay? So generally speaking for a discussion section, so in the methods section, you basically as concisely as possible, help the reader to understand what you did in the lab, essentially, right? The results section objectively points out all of the averages and the result that you saw, and also objectively points out a significant difference here, no significant difference here. Here's the photos showing how the colors and pHs changed over time and all that kind of stuff, right? So your discussion then, having already covered all of that, is to take those results and help the reader to understand the point of it, right? And generally speaking, for the discussion, you want to go from narrow to broad, right? The narrow starting point is basically, so generally what you want to do is narrowly start by looking at your results and observations and helping the reader understand kind of what we can infer from, what do we learn from directly just your results and observations, right? And then after that, the slightly broader thing you can do is then compare your results and methods with other people's results and methods to try to understand why you saw the results you did. Right? That's already quite a bit broader because depending on what you're comparing with, you might learn a lot of other things about here are 3 different possible explanations for why we didn't see a difference in our experiment, whereas other people did. okay? And then once you've done that, then you're gonna go even broader and say, okay, now that we've learned what we can from the results and looked at all the possible explanations for our findings, why does it matter? How does it fit into current scientific knowledge to help us to understand something a little more or to raise some more interesting questions? Okay, that's the general flow you want to get, and you're getting there in like 5 to 8 sentences, right? The great thing about posters is you're very concise, right? But you still need to cover all those bases along the way. So some tips for how to do each of those steps. So in terms of interpreting your results, right? Things to watch out for. Be very precise with your language. Right, be careful, because a lot of people when they get to discussions start getting like, water cooler discussion sort of way and just start talking in very casual language where they say, oh yeah, it seems like the best thing for attracting fruit flies is apple cider vinegar plus maple syrup, right? But then is it the best thing in the world, or is it just the best among the 3 things that you compared, right? Be precise, don't overreach with your conclusions. Also, be careful with your phrasing, right? It's better to say our results suggest that this, and don't say our results show or conclude, right? Don't use conclusive language for something that you're not sure of, right? The statistics say that more likely than not, 19 times out of 20, this difference is real, right? That suggests that one thing is more attractive than another, but it doesn't prove it. It doesn't show it. It just suggests it. So I use the word suggest a lot in the discussion section, right? Also, don't just stick with looking at one result at a time. Right, so as a fictional example, let's say that you went into this research project wanting to study ways to help kind of malnourished kids regain some weight, or undernourished kids regain some weight. Right, so maybe you want to see, okay, what kind of breakfast can we kind of deliver to these families that would help them regain some weight, right? Because they're undernourished, right? So maybe you would have one experiment where you did just bread versus bread with jam, right? Another experiment is just bread versus bread with peanut butter. And the one with just bread versus bread with peanut butter and jam, right? So you could look at each experiment and say, okay, overall, adding jam seemed to increase weight gain. Adding peanut butter did not increase weight gain. Adding both was somewhere in the middle, okay? So you could discuss each of those separately and say, overall, I find that jam increases, peanut butter does not, right? But then it gets more interesting as far as fully understanding or interpreting your results. You should be explaining in between experiments or comparing them to see what you can learn from your results. Okay, so the first stage is look at each of your results and combinations therein and comparisons where they're in, including different observations. Like maybe some people didn't finish their PB&J sandwich, maybe just too heavy and sticky, and they just got tired of it, right? So those observations also throw into there to discuss what it all means based on your results alone. Does that make sense? Okay, so in that stage, in 2 or 3 sentences, help us understand everything we can possibly learn from your results and observations. The next stage is to explain it then, right? So if you found that adding peanut butter to the bread didn't increase weight gain, that's a really interesting result. It might not be what you were hoping for. You were hoping to basically be able to lobby the peanut butter manufacturers to donate a whole bunch of peanut butter that you can help all those families to gain weight, right? But you didn't see a result. You didn't see a difference when you added peanut butter. But then that's a very interesting result. You might have thought, oh, that we failed to prove what we wanted to fail, but the fact that you didn't see a difference is way more interesting, right? So you should be trying to figure out, okay, how would I explain that, right? So you do some background research and find out what are some things in peanut butter that maybe cause someone not to gain weight, right? So maybe you come up with different explanations. Maybe you'll find, oh, when people eat high protein foods, they tend to feel full for a longer time. So maybe they're eating less later in the day, right? That could be part of it. Or maybe you find that, some other explanation that you can compare to another study and say, okay, maybe the other researchers that found that peanut butter helps use smooth peanut butter, but you use crunchy peanut butter, and it turns out that kids don't like crunchy peanut butter, and they just didn't finish the sandwiches, right? That might be why they actually ate less bread overall, because they gave up on the sandwich earlier, right? So that could be another comparison where you compare your methods with another group's methods to see what the differences are, and think about how those differences might have caused a difference in results. Right? So you notice that this is quite a bit broader now. You're not just looking at just your results. You're drawing upon every possible methods and results out there to try to understand your results, to give us possible explanations, and you can give more than one possible explanation. Okay, so whatever possible explanation you think are most interesting, spend 3 or 4 sentences kind of explaining that broader, trying to explain your results using other research to help. Okay, so this is why you'll be doing a lot of background research for this. And then finally, in terms of kind of taking a sentence or two to put it in a broader context, right? This is where things get interesting because remember I said that in this hypothetical study, my goal was to prove that PB&J sandwiches are the best thing for helping people gain weight. And I was going to use that research to, get people to donate these products for us to give to these families, right? So if I stuck with my initial idea and used that as my discussion to say, and tried to kind of stretch the research back towards my original goal, that might not work very well because I don't have the results to back up that original goal. What I should do instead is, what are the results telling me that's most interesting, and use that as a context instead. I will change gears, forget my whole introduction from my proposal and say, okay, what's more interesting here is the fact that the high protein diet does something different in terms of overall weight gain. Right? To me, that's a more interesting result, the unexpected result. But to me, that's the most interesting part of the story. So when I talk about the context, I'll be talking about what do we misunderstand about how adding calories might not necessarily mean weight gain, right? And maybe that's the context I want to present it in and say, overall, this raises questions that we need to answer about balancing things like protein or texture with total calorie intake. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's kind of what you're doing with the discussion. So make sure you've done each of those steps very, very well, right? That you've gotten everything you can out of your results, that you've explained it in every way you can using other research, and then think about, from everything you've discussed, what's the most interesting context, and stick it in that context. Okay? There's more details in your notes for the discussion, but any questions about discussion or anything to add?
No.
Yeah, that's general approach anyways.
You can think about it like, it's normally described as like 2 V's. You can think about it like an hourglass shape is how people normally describe their discussions. So when you first do, or like an introduction versus a discussion. So like the introduction
I'm gonna do it for the camera.
Like this way.
I'm going to do it for the camera while you speak off camera.
It's
Introduction.
Like, broad is at the top. These are like your huge, big, overarching statements. So for me, they're normally like, invasive species are bad. And then your narrow at the end is like, this is my hypothesis and why I think that this thing is going to happen with my invasive species. And then the opposite triangle happens in your discussion. You start with your exact response, like what did my crabs do and what did they do exactly? And at the end, I'm like, invasive species are still bad, but now we know something else about them. And so you can think of them as like 2 little inverted triangles, and that normally works.
Yeah, exactly. This is a great summary. Thank you. So that kind of explains why I want you to do the discussion first, because it's in really analyzing your results and trying to explain it and trying to figure out what's still not known and what's really cool that you discovered, right? Because what you discovered may not be purely just in your results. It's when you it might be as you compare your results with someone else that you realize crunchy peanut butter is just horrible. Nobody likes. I actually like crunchy peanut butter, but maybe it turns out the kids hate crunchy peanut butter. That might be the most interesting result. So you will center your context on that. That determines where you start your intro, right? Because you don't want to then start your intro back where you started before about how we need to help the undernourished families, because your ending results don't end up contributing to that context as much as you thought it would, right? The context is actually more about calories versus texture versus protein level, for example, right? So if you try to force it into a different context and it doesn't fit, then you're going to go narrow and then jump over here to something completely different, right? So finish your discussion first. Find out, once you've analyzed and figured out an explanation for everything, what's the most interesting context? And then use your introduction to say, okay, here's the context. We don't fully understand the balance between calories and textures and weight gain, right? And here's kind of some medium stuff that's known about it in the context of breakfast foods and undernourished people. And then here's the specific hypothesis we're going to test. Okay, so the introduction does, as Elizabeth would say, go the opposite direction. So in terms of introduction, that's one major goal, is to understand why your research is needed. Starting very broad in terms of how diet's very important in these different contexts and how a lot of people are suffering long-term health effects just from undernourishment during the first 4 years or whatever else. And that's why you're studying people from kids that are 1 to 4 years old, for example. Then you can talk about how we don't understand enough about calories and textures, then whatever research you have that's relevant to that says, here's a hole in this research that needs to be filled. And they say, here we go, we're going to plug that hole with this research, right? We're going to focus on this hypothesis that helps us understand that missing piece, right? So by the time we finish reading these 5, 6, 7 or so sentences, we'll understand the context, we'll understand the background with which this research is going to be interesting, and will be convinced that your research was worthwhile. Okay? Does that kind of make sense? Questions? Okay. Yeah.
Why is there a reference needed at the end of the statement instead?
Which one?
Like the example.
In the example, which page, sorry? 2 or 3?
It's under persuade the reader that your findings. The very last.
Persuade your reader. Why does it say references
In
need?
the very last parentheses. At the end. Why is there a reference needed? So that's good.
Oh, sorry. So this is a made-up example. So I haven't actually looked for references for this yet. I'm just kind of marking for myself that if I'm going to say this statement as if it's true, I'm going to have to look up references that actually back that up. Or I have to find out if it's actually true, and if it is, add the references there. I just haven't had time to actually come up with it. What's that?
The worst part.
Yeah, the worst part is finding references, right? But it's kind of backwards. You don't necessarily want to make a random assumption and then find references to support it. You should have done the background research first to find out what the actual explanations are. And as you're then giving the explanations, you will pull from the research you found earlier to back up the statements that explain your result.
It's like a claim-like sentence you need to.
Yeah, exactly. So what you'll find in each of your discussion and introduction statements is that every phrase, every fact you spout out needs to be backed up either by your results, in which case you'll be saying that, let's say that adding peanut butter doesn't increase weight gain, figure 2, right? Therefore, when they try to decide whether that statement is true, they can look at figure 2, see the significant difference, and say, okay, I agree. You've shown that that's true. The next statement might be that surveys show that kids hate crunchy peanut butter, right? You'll have to reference that survey so people have a reason to believe that that's true, right? You can't just make a statement and not back it up, okay? And if you have multiple references for it, great, right? But choose the ones that are most relevant and most direct and most relevant to your context, okay? Yeah, so generally speaking, you'll be needing references for each statement, but thankfully because each section is like maximum 10 sentences long, you won't need that many references, but you'll need to find the key ones to back up the story you want to tell, okay? So that's why like originally I was thinking you'd only be writing your discussion and introduction sections, but you can't really do it without the references, so you might as well find the references along the way. In terms of how you're going to be citing your references, for now do it in APA format just because there's a lot of good guides out there, and I've kind of linked to one here that has general info that's enough for most of your references, but also links to specific situations. So let's say that you're referencing some Wikipedia page or a website or YouTube video, there's links to tell you how to reference those as well, or you can easily Google that as well. So APA format is very often used and lots of good guides out there, so use that for now. But what we'll probably do when you're ready for the final printing of your poster and you've decided on all your references and nothing going to change is we'll switch it over to what Elizabeth described before and use the little superscript numbers instead, right? So we'll basically then reorder your reference list in the order in which they're first cited in your poster and then replace the whole, Lam et al. 1984, whatever else, with just a little number 1. Right, and then we'll look at, what's number 1 again? It's Lam 1984 paper. Okay, so we'll change it at the last minute, but for now, just use APA. Okay, questions? Okay, I think let's take a quick break first. All right, 10-minute break, go pee or whatever else. Those who are going to present results, get yourself organized. All right, so at 3:14, we'll get back together and do your lab meeting. If you don't have notes, feel free to grab some. All right, so I'm just going to record this last little bit so I can have this in the recording, but I'll turn it off for the actual lab meeting so that people don't have to be on camera. So a few things. For your equipment requests, right? So you've already requested your stuff for this week by last Monday, right? And so that stuff's going to be ready for you for Tuesday and Thursday this week. So by 6 p.m. today, your team needs to send me your equipment requests for next week, which is week 9. Okay, so if you have updates that you make after today's lab meeting because you thought of some ideas, whether you're up here or not, you thought of some ideas you want to change, and you need a few more Eppendorf tubes or something like that, then put it into your thing and send it to me again. But I have to receive it by 6. At 6 o'clock, I'm going to start consolidating the list so that I can discuss it with Cheryl first thing tomorrow. What else? Yeah, so for the lab meeting, we have more time to actually discuss things. right? So we have only 4 groups presenting. We have over an hour, right? So we have at least 15 minutes per group. But you don't have to stay up here like the whole time if you don't want to. So essentially, all I want the groups to be able to do is I'll put up your graph or graphs. You can cycle through them if you have multiple graphs, and just tell us how you set it up. Right, so assume that we forgot your initial presentations before and what your project's about, because there's 12 different groups. So tell us what you did last week, explain your results to us, and tell us what you think it means and what you're going to do next, right? And then people can either write down or raise their hand and ask questions or share ideas as much as they like until the group is satisfied, and then you can just wander off and the next group comes up. Okay, whenever we're done, we'll be done for the class, and you can continue chatting if you like. And then I'll go and scan these and upload them to CrowdMark so that the groups who presented can cycle through all of the comments on their own time. As before, I do ask that you give a quick mark. So as you read through each comment as a team, just one of you will have to decide. If there's nothing written, just write a 0. If there's something written that's not really relevant, write a 0.5. If there's something written that shows that they understood the project but didn't necessarily push you forward, then give it a 1. If they give you anything interesting on, give them more than a 1. Just a little bit of feedback to the commenter that this is useful. Okay, just to help guide each other back and forth. So that's the expectation for those who are presenting. So those who don't prefer to speak out loud, just write down your ideas because they will read them and benefit from them. Questions? Concerns? So we'll be going in opposite order. So we're starting with group 2E, right? So I think I warned everyone about that. So I'm gonna shut this off now. Stop recording.